All right, well, good to see everybody out tonight. As Joel mentioned, I am not in the slightest bit prepared to teach class. So this should go about like you'd expect. So need a lot of comments tonight. We're on lesson 4. If you got the study book, and it's page 7. We're studying an Old Testament survey. So not really detailed, as Greg's mentioned as we went through this. We're not going to spend time dwelling on each verse or each chapter even. It's just a high-level survey and overview of the Old Testament. And so we are ready to talk about the Law of Moses. And again, that's on page 7 in your study books if you need one of those. So question number 1 wants us to go to the book of Exodus. So if you'll turn to the book of Exodus chapter 19. And question number 1 says, how was God's blessing and covenant with Israel conditional? And it references Exodus 19 verses 1 through 9. We won't read all of those verses just for time's sake. But if you look at verse 5 of Exodus 19, it says, now therefore, if you will obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine. Verse 6 says, and ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and holy nation. There are words which thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel. Moses came and called for the elders of the people and laid before their faces all these words which the Lord commanded him. And all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord hath spoken we will do. And Moses returned the words of the people unto the Lord. And the Lord said unto Moses, lo, I come unto thee in a thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with thee and believe thee forever. And Moses told the words of the people unto the Lord. So verse 5 is the key verse there. Verse 5, if is a conditional statement. And so what the Lord said was, if you will obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you'll be a peculiar treasure unto me. So that shows the conditionality of God's blessings on the people. So one thing about that is that statement is true, and the opposite would be true as well. If you do not, we can infer, if you do not obey me or obey my voice, then you will not be a peculiar people. So God's promises have always been conditional. The same is true today. If we obey God today, then He'll be a God to us. We can be in good standing with Him. If we do not, then obviously we will not be blessed by Him. The follow-up question to that says, where did Moses receive the law? And it references, again, Exodus 19. And it references verses 10 to 25. Again, we won't read through all of that. But we'll read the first 2 or 3 verses here, beginning at verse 10. It says, the Lord said unto Moses, go unto the people and sanctify them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes, and be ready against the 3rd day. For the 3rd day the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai. And thou shalt set bounds unto the people round about, saying, take heed to yourselves, that ye go not up into the mount, nor touch the border of it. Whosoever toucheth the mount shall surely be put to death. And so he goes on from there. If you skip down to, skip over to verse 19. Well, verse 18 says, Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire. The smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly. And when the voice of the trumpet sounded long and waxed louder and louder, Moses spake, and God answered him by a voice. And the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mount. And the Lord called Moses up to the top of the mount. And Moses went up. And the Lord said unto Moses, go down, charge the people, lest they break through unto the Lord to gaze, and many of them perish. So what a awesome scene on Mount Sinai, where there were thunderings and lightnings and a cloud, and Moses was called up. There was smoke, fire descending upon it. I mean, that's really hard to imagine. That's stuff like Hollywood couldn't come up with. A trumpet sounding, Moses spake, and God answered him by a voice. Can you imagine that scene? But all this took place on Mount Sinai, where Moses received the law. Wait.
Yeah. Go back to your first point.
Yeah, go ahead.
About in verse 5, we talked about careful keep my covenant.
Mm-hmm.
So that one verse is repeated all throughout the Old Testament. Every time, especially if you think about it, or at least the concepts there, especially in Judges, every time they go into a new judge, even though he may not say it, but the concept is always there because they keep going back into the sin all the time. And God reminds them many times through his prophets and stuff throughout the Old Testament. And even Stephen's speech in Acts 7, he talks about the prophets. They warned you. You keep going back and doing the same thing over and over again. So this is where he tells them, you got to keep my covenant. You got to do what I said, or it's not going to be good for you. Everything's going to be bad.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So when people look and say, "Oh man, God allowed His people to be taken into captivity, like bad things happened to them, and all these different things throughout time," He's just being mean to them. No, it's always been conditional, and He'd already warned them up front, gave them plenty of opportunities. But like you said, in the Judges especially, it's like a roller coaster. It was up and down. They'd fall away, and He'd raise up a judge, and then they'd, because they cried out to Him, "We need your help," but then they'd fall away again. It was always conditional. Yeah. Anybody else have any thoughts or comments? Wade wants to help me out, so I appreciate Wade. Anybody else? All right. Question number 2 says, list the 10 commandments, and that's found, of course, here. What we just read about was God speaking to Moses on Mount Sinai, and in chapter 20 is where those 10 commandments are found. Let's see. If you skip down to, I guess, verse 7. Well, no, I guess it's really all the way. I guess we don't want to read through that entire chapter. But the 10 commandments, let me see if I can get these in order here. So, I'm the Lord your God. You shall have no gods before me. I think that's the first one. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. Honor your father and mother. Do not kill. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. Let me see. You shall not bear false witness. Verse 16. Don't covet. Verse 17. Did I miss any? Did I get them all? Oh, what is it? Oh, yeah, and the graven image, of course. That's the one that I missed. So those are the 10 commandments that God gave on Mount Sinai. I think we're here in the adult class. I'm not sure we have to make the point, but every once in a while you run into people that are upset by the fact if you tell them that we don't live under the 10 commandments today. And I think we know that most all of these commandments are repeated in some form or fashion in the New Testament, with the exception of, remember the Sabbath day and to keep it holy. Go ahead.
You remember when, a decade or more ago now, there was a big push to keep the 10 Commandments in our schools.
Yeah.
And we knew that wasn't of significance to us, but I think we appreciate the fact that people want to keep the Bible in schools.
Right.
And then it was a little misdirected.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think people are just sometimes shocked. I've had people be shocked at me before. Like, we live under the 10 Commandments. I'm like, well, I appreciate the 10 Commandments, God's law to Moses, and many of them are repeated that we do. I mean, honor your father and mother. Yes. Don't murder. Yeah, absolutely. But we don't live under the 10 Commandments. That's true. Go ahead.
Don't you think that because they'll say Sunday is the Sabbath?
Yeah, it's the.
I think that's how they're trying to keep under it.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's not. Sundays is not the Sabbath. But I think you're right. It's like, well, Sunday's the new Sabbath or something. But we don't have to make that stretch. The old law was given to Moses, to the Israelites. It was for them to keep. Well, now we've got a new law to live by. But those were the 10 Commandments. Go ahead, Mike.
So these laws, all of these laws have penalties
Mm-hmm.
for these laws for the Jews to keep. How many of these today, as far as that are in our judicial system, in our governmental laws, how many of these 10 Commandments do we see?
Well, maybe don't kill and don't steal. I guess for the most part, all the other ones are.
That's probably it.
Yeah.
As Moses was receiving these laws, the people down off the mountain were breaking these laws.
Well,
They were breaking. They was you know, and making a golden calf even. You
Yeah.
know, but, that's,
Yeah, not super good, you know. So he's up here, God's delivering the law to him. You know, Moses, the lawgiver, given the law by God, and goes down and finds the people. To your point, just totally off track. Yeah, what's interesting about these 10 Commandments? Some of them deal with, you know, the people's. I was going to say interaction, not interaction, but the people toward God. You know, have no other gods before me. Don't take the Lord's name in vain. But then a lot of them have to do with dealing with others. Don't kill, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't bear false witness, don't covet, what your neighbor has. And so it's kind of interesting that in these 10 Commandments, I think you see the wisdom of God toward Him, toward others. And so, again, we're just doing a high-level survey. We're not going to spend a ton of time talking about it. But the 10 Commandments, the main takeaway is we know that we don't live under those 10 Commandments, but those were the law that, a part of the law that God gave to Moses on Mount Sinai. All right, number 3, it says, were there any other laws? What is regulated in Leviticus chapter 11? So as we just sort of alluded to, these weren't the only laws given to God's people. And if you go to Leviticus chapter 11, and then the follow-up question on number 3 says, what's regulated in Leviticus 18? So in Leviticus 11, we're not going to read through the whole chapter. It's 47 verses. But the first few verses there, if you look at verse 2, it says, speaking to the children of Israel, saying, these are the beasts which ye shall eat among all the beasts that are on the earth. Whatsoever parteth the hoof and is cloven-footed and cheweth the cud among the beasts, that shall you eat. Nevertheless, these shall ye not eat of them that chew the cud, or of them that divide the hoof, as the camel, because he cheweth the cud, but divideth not the hoof, he is unclean unto you. And it goes on. We won't read through all of that. But essentially, what they're being told here is, here's some things that you can eat, and here's some things that are unclean that you shouldn't eat. So what are your thoughts on that? Why did God do this? I mean, what difference does it make what they eat and what they don't eat? Wonder why God did that. Go ahead, Wade.
Well, when you think about it, at least pork, there's actually bacteria in pork meat.
Yeah.
And if you don't cook it right, you can get sick from it. And maybe some of the other meat too. So,
Yeah.
and I think part of the reason is because God was protecting them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. So I think people with our limited knowledge, and some of this stuff, to your point, we've just figured out in relatively, recently. But God knew. I mean, He created all these things, so He knew that if they eat some of these things, they're going to get sick. It may kill them. They may die. And so He laid down these rules. You can eat this, but don't eat this. It's unclean to you. Some of the people, no doubt, were probably like, "What's the big deal if we eat camel? What's the big deal there?" But God knew and He understood, and so He gave them these rules. As you go on into Leviticus 11, it starts talking about carcasses of these animals and things that were unclean for their health purposes. If you touch some of these dead animals and then you don't wash your hands, you're going to get sick. It's not going to be a good situation for you. In verse 44 of Leviticus 11. It says, "For I am the Lord your God. Ye shall therefore sanctify yourselves, and ye shall be holy, for I am holy. Neither shall you defile yourselves with any manner of creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. For I am the Lord that bringeth you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. Ye shall therefore be holy, for I am holy. This is the law of the beast, and of the fowl, and of every living creature that moveth in the waters, and every creature that creepeth upon the earth, to make a difference between the unclean and the clean, and between the beasts that they may be eaten, and the beasts that may not be eaten." So, God is just putting out here, this is my creation, this is what you can eat, and this is what you can't eat. And it's not because God doesn't like them or He's just being mean, but He's doing what's best for mankind. All right, in Leviticus 18, the question is, what's regulated there? So turn over to Leviticus 18.
in verse 13, when Peter's in the vision, when the sheet is let down, all the animals there. And it says, a voice came to him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter said, "By no means, Lord, for I have never eaten anything unholy and unclean."
Yeah.
So he makes that comment. And so to the Jews, they didn't even want to go around that. I mean, that was just
Yeah.
totally. And so maybe part of that was to teach them,
Yeah.
that there are certain things that God does not want you to be a part of,
Yeah.
And maybe that was a lesson for them as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think you're right. I've always thought that. So the King James Version, Peter says, "Not so, Lord." And I've always found that so fascinating. Jesus said, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not the things which I say? And so he's got this vision that says, rise, kill, and eat. And he says, "Not so, Lord." And so he's basically saying, no, I'm not going to do what you say, but I'm still going to call you Lord. And I think that's interesting. But he had been trained. I mean, as a Jew, I'm not going to touch those. I'm not going to get near any of that unclean stuff. I've never done that, and I'm not going to start now. But obviously there it was because you're doing something different. You're going to go to the Gentiles and preach and teach to them. But yeah, that's a interesting thought. These rules for them, what they could and couldn't eat. If you've got any acquaintances that I used to work with a guy who was a Muslim when I worked at Nissan, and they don't eat pork. They still keep a lot of these things under the old law. So it's interesting. I think they're not. They don't have the whole concept there, but we're not under that law now. But those were regulations for them, for the Jews. At that time, as far as what they could and couldn't eat. So Leviticus 18, if we get over there, here just in a nutshell, again, we won't read through that entire chapter, but immoral acts are forbidden in Leviticus 18. And so as you go through that chapter, things that they should and shouldn't do of a moral nature are discussed. Let's see, verse 5 says, "You shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments, which if a man do, he shall live in them. I am the Lord. None of you shall approach to any that is near of kin to him to uncover their nakedness. The nakedness of thy father, nakedness of thy mother, shalt thou not uncover. She is thy mother, thou shalt not uncover her nakedness. Nakedness of thy father's wife you shall not uncover." And it goes on, mentions other family members. If you skip down to, let's see, all sorts of things. Verse 21 says, "Thou shalt not let any of thy seed pass through the fire to Molech, neither shalt thou profane the name of thy God. I am the Lord. Thou shalt not lie with mankind as womankind. It is abomination. Neither shalt thou lie with any beast to defile thyself therewith." I mean, so there's all kinds of perversions of a sexual nature, just all kinds of perversions mentioned here. And matter of fact, some that we're still dealing with today here in Leviticus in the old law. It's interesting if you talk to people that practice homosexuality but claim to be Christians. I know of some that do. It's interesting because God has never approved of that, not even close. And here in the law, man should not lie with mankind as with womankind. It's just forbidden. Nor with animals. And I know that's not pleasant to even think about, but God put that into place. There in verse 21, it almost seems like, does that really have to be said? But we know that there were people that were offering their children to the false god Molech. They were burning their children and offering them to this false god. Obviously, God didn't approve of that for I guess multiple reasons. Verse 24 says, "Defile not ye yourselves in any of these things, for in all these things the nations are defiled, which I cast out before you. All the land is defiled, therefore I do visit the iniquity thereof upon it, and the land itself vomiteth out her inhabitants." And so God is just laying out a lot of immoral acts, immoral conduct that His people should not do. Again, reference back verses 4 and 5. "You shall do my judgments, keep my ordinances, and walk in them. I am the Lord your God." So if you're going to be a Jew, if you're going to be my chosen people, you will do these things. And again, I think we've established for their good and to teach them a lesson, I think. Anybody have any thoughts about question number 3? All right, let's move along. Try to move along pretty quick here. So if we go back to Exodus chapter 25, turn back to Exodus 25. Question number 4 says, what was the nature and purpose of God's sanctuary while Israel wandered in the wilderness? And it references the first 9 verses of Exodus chapter 25.
You're doing good.
No, it's time for me to tag you in. I will gladly tag you. All right. So ready for number 4.
Okay. Thank you, Josh. I'll be glad for you to continue.
I think you got it.
Sorry to be so late. Storm was pretty bad out there on Bear Creek Pike. There was traffic that stopped us, but for those of you who know where Cranford Hollow crosses Bear Creek Pike, it really tore up out there, so those people are hurting. Okay, so picking up where Josh left off. Of course, what we're doing here, of course, in this study is a lot of trees down on Joe Brown Road. What we're doing in this study is try to get an overview of the whole Old Testament. This lesson is actually sort of just a little break to deal with aspects of the law of Moses that was given. So last week we talked about the children of Israel coming out of Egyptian bondage, crossing the Red Sea, led by Moses. They come to Mount Sinai, and that's where they receive the law. And so we're just stopping here primarily to get a quick look at the law of Moses that was given at Mount Sinai. One of the things, a lot of people connect the 10 Commandments with the law of Moses, which they were obviously a part of the law of Moses. But there was a lot more to the law of Moses than just the 10 Commandments. For instance, one of the things is that he told them how to make the tabernacle, the sanctuary. Look in Exodus 25. In Exodus chapter 25, beginning verse 1, it says, the Lord spake to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel that they bring me an offering of every man that giveth it willingly with his heart. Ye shall take my offering. This is the offering which you shall take from them, gold and silver and brass and blue and purple and scarlet. And it goes on to enumerate those things. And they were going to use those things that were contributed for the purposes of constructing the sanctuary, the tabernacle. And verse 8, it says, let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them according to all that I show thee after the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of the instruments thereof, even so shall ye make it. And so the tabernacle was going to be the representative association of God with the people of Israel. It would, obviously God is a spirit, he's everywhere, but this would be a focal point. This would be a place for them to recognize God's presence. And when they made the tabernacle and when they dedicated, there were some miraculous signs that accompanied the dedication of the tabernacle. God was with his people. I think one of the really interesting things is there in verse 9 where he says, make it according to the pattern that I showed you. Make it like I said, follow the pattern that I specified was what they were instructed to do. So often we deal with the popular religious idea today that God doesn't care too much about details. God is not a God of details. Just as long as we get the big picture right, get the broad generalities okay, God's okay with anything else. That's really never been the case, and that's not the nature of God. God is a God of details. And even when it came to making the tabernacle, see that you make it like I told you to make it. Follow the pattern that I revealed to you. And I think that's something that needs to be emphasized, especially in our world today. So, something bad happens while Moses is on Mount Sinai receiving the law from God. Look at Exodus 32. We know this part of the story pretty well. Exodus 32, verse 1. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down out of the mount, the people gathered themselves together unto Aaron and said unto him, Up, make us gods, which shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we know not what has become of him. And Aaron said to them, Break off the golden earrings which are in your ears of your wives and your sons and your daughters, and bring them unto me. And all the people brake off the gold earrings which were in their ears, and brought them to Aaron. And he received them at their hand, and fashioned it with a graving tool after he had made a golden calf. And they said, These be thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. When Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it. So, we know the horrible thing that happened here with the golden calf. And it's just so amazing that God had showed his hand so powerfully with all the plagues and the miraculous deliverance out of Egyptian bondage. And then for them so quickly to turn to idols is just a pretty amazing thing. They had already, by the way, received the part of the law that said, no graven images, no other gods before me. They already had received that part of the law, and they immediately turned to this. Wade?
I often wonder when I read this passage. Of course, the American Standard, it translates as, This is your God, Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. I often wonder, they obviously have been traveling with God for a long time, so they know who God is. I often wonder if they didn't forget who God was, but they wanted something in front of them.
Yeah, they want some
They
representation.
wanted some representation of God, and so they were building an idol to represent the God of Israel.
Yeah. But, of course, in doing so, they were already violating the Ten Commandments. No graven images. One of the specific Ten Commandments. And so it was all wrong. And then, of course, their riotous celebration around this idol, which this text goes on to describe. I was always so disappointed in Aaron's involvement in that business. And when Moses called him out about making this golden calf, in verse 24, this is Exodus 32:24. Aaron said I said to them, Aaron's talking, I said to the people, whosoever hath any gold, let them break it off. So they gave it me. Then I cast it in the fire, and there came out this calf. Wow, we were just shocked. So I asked them to give me their gold earrings, and they did, and we just threw it in the fire, and lo and behold, out pops this calf. But we know in the verses before this that he fashioned it with a graving tool. He made it. He knew he made it. So Aaron turns out to look really bad in that process. Thomas?
Going along with that point, it does say in verse 8 that it says, these are your gods, Israel, who brought you out of Egypt. So they weren't just doing it for God, they were doing it for other gods.
Yeah, the King James uses the plural. These be thy gods, O Israel. So they were. It was the whole thing is corrupt. At its very core, it's what they did here is horribly corrupt, and they are punished for it. Yeah, Thomas.
Well, also the other thing too is that they haven't received the Ten Commandments just yet because Moses is coming down the mountain.
He's been down once already. He's gone back up. Yeah, he's been down once already. He's been back up. It's because he had. But you're right, because when he comes down from the mountain this time, he's carrying the stone tablets upon which are engraved the Ten Commandments, and he throws them down and breaks them. So you're right about that. He had been up on the mountain once and down and back up again, but you are right. He's bringing the stone tablets engraved with the Ten Commandments when he comes down this time, and he throws them down. I've always thought, oh man, Moses, you really messed up there. You threw down the gold tablets that God made. You shouldn't have done that, Moses. But God doesn't seem to even rebuke him for doing that. And God makes them again later. You get the idea that a degree of righteous indignation is a good thing when it's deserved, right? And then, of course, the people are punished. Verse 26. Moses stood in the gate of the camp and said, who is on the Lord's side? Let him come to me. And all the sons of Levi gathered themselves together unto him. And he said unto them, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, Put every man his sword by his side, and go in and out from gate to gate throughout the camp, and slay every man his brother, and every man his companion, every man his neighbor. And the children of Levi did according to the word of Moses, and there fell of the people that day about 3,000 men. Again, you see we see the goodness of God over and over again, but you see the severity of God in episodes like this too, and that just cannot be neglected. Sadly, people do want to neglect that too much. Yeah.
You made a good point about Moses throwing down the tablets, but it's righteous anger. Right?
Yeah.
And of course, Jesus did kind of a similar thing, right? In the tabernacle or the temple, whichever one it was, he goes in there and turns over the tables.
Yeah.
That's a big deal, especially in the Christian world. Okay, no, that wasn't actually anger. No, it was.
Yeah.
But it was righteous
Yeah.
anger because that's a real thing. And God demonstrates that throughout the entire Bible.
I think you're right, Timothy. So everybody wants to emphasize the love and goodness of God. Absolutely, obviously. Right. But they don't want to see the full picture of God. God is a jealous God. God is a just God. God is a God who punishes. People today want to just completely take that off the table and to their own harm. Thomas?
I think it's interesting going back with the anger. If you compare it from this into when he struck the stone, of like what's the difference in between those? Because yes, he's mad at the people in both scenarios, but the difference is that he's disobeying God versus the other one. In this one,
you're right. In the episode where he was supposed to speak to the rock, but he struck the rock. But what he didn't do was glorify God in that. Must we bring forth water from this rock, and so he didn't glorify God. This episode was different. I think you're right. Quickly, when are we going to stop this? When is the class over tonight?
10 minutes more.
We got 10 more. We're going to go to 8 o'clock. Okay. All right. Let's do this then. Real quickly, again, another episode that displays the justice of God. We know the law of the Sabbath, Exodus 35. Look at Exodus 35, beginning verse 1. Exodus 35:1, Moses gathered all the congregation of the children of Israel together, said to them, These are the words which the Lord hath commanded that ye should do them. 6 days shall work be done, but on the seventh day there shall be to you a holy day, a Sabbath of rest to the Lord. Whosoever doeth work therein shall be put to death. Ye shall kindle no fire throughout all your habitations upon the Sabbath day. No work on the Sabbath day. Go to Numbers 15. In Numbers 15, that law is violated. Verse 32. Numbers 15:32. While the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man that gathered sticks upon the Sabbath day. And they that found him gathering sticks brought him unto Moses and Aaron and unto all the congregation, and they put him in ward because it was not declared what should be done to him. And the Lord said to Moses, The man shall be surely put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones without the camp. And all the congregation brought him without the camp and stoned him with stones, and he died as the Lord commanded Moses. Again, talk about God, talk about the justice of God, talk about God punishing. I've heard, and you could probably imagine, you can speculate about this guy picking up sticks. I don't know why but nobody knows why he was picking up sticks. But you could speculate, you could make a really sob story if you wanted to. He's got a sick baby at his house, and the baby's cold, and it needs to warm up, or they just need to kindle a little fire for a little warmth. They got, you could make the most emotionally sob story that you want. It doesn't matter. The law was, and the law specifically said, don't kindle a fire on the Sabbath day, and they did. And the punishment, it wasn't their determination, it was God's determination that the man should be put to death. That's the kind of God that God is. God wants obedience. And we can never neglect to stress that. Is God a God of love? Absolutely, yes. Think about all that he did for the Israelites in delivering them from Egypt. But you still got to obey him. Wait.
I think God makes laws to make us strong.
Excuse me?
I think he makes laws to make us strong.
Okay.
Because, this was a general law for everybody to obey. God knew what the time of the year was. He knew that it would get cold at this point. And he knew that, by them training themselves to be obedient to them, made them a more faithful person and stronger.
Okay. Oh, so having rules to live by is actually a good thing, not a bad thing, right? Tom?
Also, too, it's coming up that here, you had these people that were a slave, basically, nation within there. They didn't really have any laws to govern them. All they had was the control of Egypt. Here, they'd known of God down through the forefathers talking about, there's been a deliverer promised to them. Here, they've been in slavery for close to 400 years, and they're coming out of that. They know of God, but they don't know who He is. They don't really know how to serve Him. They're having to be taught that. And they're having to have rules set up so they can be a nation and live as a nation. Without those rules and situations that come through, they would have died in the wilderness. So, God's going through, and there's passages that talk about, I'm going to make you a peculiar people for me. And
Yeah.
So this is what He's doing. He sets dietary laws for them. He sets religious laws for them. He sets things that are totally contrary to the gods of Egypt and the lands around it. So He's telling them, this is who I am. This is how I want you to worship me. And these are the laws I want you to live by that shows that you have the obedience to.
Yeah. And just like the laws that we live by, they're designed for our good. God didn't make laws just to be making laws, and He didn't make laws just to see if He could be mean and make it too hard. Moses told the children of Israel in his final address to them, Deuteronomy 6:24, the Lord commanded us to do all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God for our good always, that He might preserve us alive as it is this day. The laws of God are for our good. They were for their laws were for their good. Our laws are for our good. We need to appreciate that. Timothy?
Why do you think here in this situation, God punishes him almost immediately, as like other parts of the Old Testament, He doesn't?
Yeah.
For instance, in Matthew 13, He references Isaiah. And if you read Isaiah in a particular context, I'm just going to read the 13 to you real quickly. Indeed, in their case, the prophet Isaiah says, you will indeed hear, but never understand. You will indeed see, but never perceive. But this people's heart is grown dull, going to their ears, they barely hear, their eyes, they're closed. Unless they should see with their eyes and hear their ears, and understand with their hearts, and turn, I will heal them. And so it's an open cry. He's like continuously trying. He sends Isaiah out there to preach to them once again. Why do you think that He gives these people another chance with His own?
The guy with the sticks got no second chance. But later, people would, be given a chance to, and I don't have an answer to that. I guess that's probably saying enough. I mean, we'll leave that in the hands of God. But in some instances, the quick punishment was certainly to instill a lesson to the people. In the case of that guy who violated the Sabbath, I bet you there weren't any people picking up sticks the next Sabbath day, So, some of the quick response in those instances was surely reinforce the law of God. Wade? All right, let's go real quickly. We're just going to be out of time. We'll get all of this done. But number 7, what tribe did Thomas?
I have one more thing. What's the difference between Matthew 12, where it talks about Jesus on the Sabbath going through the grains and plucking the grain, versus the picking up the sticks? What's the difference there of like breaking the Sabbath at all?
Yeah. Well, that's we probably don't have time to do that justice, but they were not breaking the law. They weren't stealing. First of all, they weren't stealing by taking the corn. Secondly, Jesus said what they did was lawful. So that was within the rules of the Sabbath. So He says what David did, on the other hand, was not lawful. But basically there, what he's calling out the Jews for their double standard. They praised David, although David clearly broke the law. They condemned his disciples who had not broken the law. That's the gist of that context. But I think what you have to do is read that again, and I think he says that what his disciples did was lawful. So it was within It was within an acceptable practice on the Sabbath day. Okay, real quickly, where did the priests come from? What tribe did the priests come from? We all know Levi. Were all Levites priests? Were all Levites priests? No, only descendants of Aaron. So to be a priest, you had to be a Levite. But more than that, you had to be a direct descendant from Aaron. Moses and Aaron were of the tribe of Levi. They were brothers, of course. They were Levi. They were of the tribe of Levi. Aaron became the first high priest. All the priests thereafter had to have direct lineage from Aaron. That would make them Levites, of course, but more specifically, Levites of the lineage of Aaron were the priest. Real quickly, and this kind of catches us up to where we were last week. Flip over to Joshua 24, to a passage that we use a lot. So we know that Moses dies, Joshua leads them into the promised land. And Joshua, at the end of his life, places before the people a challenge. Joshua 24, verse 14. Now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the flood and in Egypt, and serve ye the Lord. And if it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, choose you this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land ye dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So that sort of catches us up. Last week we ended our lesson with Joshua leading the people into the promised land and conquering it. We backed up here this week just briefly to look at the law of Moses delivered at Mount Sinai as the people were traveling to the promised land. But we jump back now to where we ended last week. Joshua leads them into the promised land. He's giving his final message to people, but it seems clear that he is particularly worried about idolatry, about the people becoming idol worshipers. And they did, right? They did. We know the history. We know that the history of the Israelites was just over and over again. They got tied up with idol worship. Joshua was concerned with that as he gave his final message. What about us? The author makes a point. What about us? I have never, ever, I've never even come close to being tempted to take out a pocket knife and whittle me an idol and set it on a shelf and bow down to it. I don't worship idols. Idolatry is just not a temptation to me at all. Or is it, right? Or is it, right? We remember, if the author references Ephesians 5, verse 5, which says that a covetous man is an idolater. In Matthew 6, in the Sermon on the Mount, remember, Jesus said you cannot serve God and mammon or money. Money can come between you and God. In John chapter 12, there were some people who wouldn't confess Jesus because they loved the praise of men. Anything that comes between us and God is an idol. Anything that we do not give God his place because we're giving place to something else, money, praise of men, whatever it is, whatever we seek that becomes more important to us than God himself is an idol. And so, yes, we are. We may not carve our idols out, but we have to be on guard against idolatry. Real quick, out of time, all of us need to be prepared to explain to people that the law of Moses, this law of Moses that we just gave a real quick cursory view to tonight, this law of Moses has been abolished. We don't live by that law anymore. It served a purpose. Look in Galatians 3. Galatians chapter 3, verse 24. Galatians 3:24. Wherefore the law was our schoolmaster to bring us unto Christ, that we might be justified by faith. But after that faith has come, we're no longer under a schoolmaster. So the Old Testament and the law of the Old Testament served a purpose to tutor and nurture, like a schoolmaster, bring the people along to be ready to receive the Messiah. But clearly it says there, we're no longer under the law. It was a schoolmaster. We're no longer under the schoolmaster. And then, what I think my favorite passage to make this argument is Colossians 2. Colossians 2:14, blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us, which was contrary to us, and took it out of the way, nailing it to his cross. Jesus nailed some kind of handwritten ordinances to his cross. Took it out of the way. We're not left to wonder what he has in mind there, because in verse 16 he says, let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink or in respect of an holy day or of the new moon or of the Sabbath days. So, Colossians 2:14 through 16 clearly shows that all aspects of the law of Moses have been abolished. Some of our religious friends try to divide the old law up into the ceremonial law and the moral law. The Ten Commandments constitute primarily the moral law. All that business about the priests and their garments and the sacrifices and all that was ceremonial. The ceremonial law has been abolished. The moral law remains. Colossians 2 verse 14 says that he took it out of the way. Verse 16 mentions some of those things, what you eat, what you drink, but it also mentions the Sabbath days. All of that, all of the law of Moses has been abolished, nailed to the cross of Christ. Okay, so I think the way we want to look at tonight's lesson is sort of a holding place in time. We got the children out of Egypt. We got Moses on Mount Sinai, delivers the law. Joshua takes them into the promised land, and they conquer it. Now what happens? They are now back in the promised land. They've received the promised land. They've conquered the promised land. Now there's a lot of history that takes place. And next week, Lord willing, we'll talk about the era of the judges after they have come into the promised land, the judges. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Take a little different.